Good day. I'm grateful for this opportunity to make a contribution to this important seminar held by the African Union, by the African missions in Geneva, on the topic of autonomous weapons. I think it is very appropriate and very timely that the African group focuses on this important issue that will have an influence on our lives in the future. The point I want to make is that I think there are plenty of reasons to be concerned, plenty of reasons to engage with this particular issue and to look at how this will affect Africa's interests as well as the interests of the world as a whole. Human beings have for millions of years have used weapons as their tools, whether those were spears or whether it was gunpowder, whether it was aerial power, but we used weapons as our tools when we were engaged in armed conflict or during law enforcement as well. This is about to change. We're now in an era where technology can be used where the decision to call the shots, so to speak, goes over to computers. So the decision whether to use lethal or other force against people may be taken by computers. This has been with drones. We always were in charge, but also now with autonomous weapons, we are moving to a new era where the question is whether we are still using the weapons as our tools or do they have a life of their own, and can they take decisions concerning our lives as well. And this can then be the case, as I've mentioned, during armed conflict, but also in the future in law enforcement. I had the opportunity in 2013 to put this issue on the United Nations agenda in the Human Rights Council. African states were very supportive, and this then found its way into the Convention on Conventional Weapons, and it has been there for 4 years, and now I think we're at a point where decisions will need to be taken and direction forward needs to be determined. And I think a number of issues are at play. In the first place, there's the question whether these autonomous weapons, these computers who take the decisions, whether they can actually do it. Can they take these targeting decisions? So in armed conflict, can they actually make, for example, the proportionality decisions to decide that collateral damage is in order in a particular case, that 10 lives of civilians may be put on the scale versus the life of a high value military target? That's typically a human kind of decision. And so one of the questions is whether computers and autonomous weapons can make that sort of decisions, but also whether they can really distinguish between different people. Can they distinguish between a hunter and a soldier, for example? And that's the first question, whether the technology is up to the task. The second question, I think, is more an ethical one, and that's the question, should they do it? Should computers have this kind of power over human life? And it seems to me that human life is something of such significance that the decision to take a human life would always require some kind of human decision making, because machines simply cannot appreciate the importance of that step of taking a human life. So can they do it? Should they do it? And then in the third place, there's the question of accountability. So we know that if human beings make mistakes, there's the possibility that they can be charged, that they can in one way or another be forced to pay some reparations. What happens when there are mistakes, as there will be with computers as well, and the wrong people are targeted, or too many civilians are, for example, targeted? So what can one do with a computer? So from one perspective, one can say, well, you can put them in the prison until their batteries are flat, but is that really accountability? So the question of accountability comes into it in the third place as well. And then the fourth question, I think, is the one whether the use of autonomous weapons, and to some extent that's the same case with drones and other unmanned systems, whether it lowers the threshold of using force. Does it make it easier to go into an armed conflict? If you didn't have to go yourself, you send your autonomous weapons and they take those sort of decisions. Those are the four main questions, I think, that are raised by autonomous weapons. And these are the issues that I think need to be addressed. As you may know, the African Commission on Human People's Rights in 2015 adopted a general comment on the right to life. And so they looked at the right to life in general. But they also looked at autonomous weapons, and they then used the concept, which is used widely in other circles as well, that autonomous weapon delivery should always be subject to meaningful human control. Yes, technology can play a role. In some cases, it should play a role. But in the end, there should be human decision-making, human responsibility, the potential of human accountability when such momentous decisions are taken. And I think in the background to the African Commission on Human People's Rights drafting that general comment was the idea that in Africa, the idea of human life is associated with dignity. What we're interested in is a dignified human life. It comes in many different cultures in Africa. In my country, South Africa, there's emphasis on Ubuntu, for example. But I think in general one can say that the role of humanity in Africa has long been predominant. And that's why I think Africa's voice in deciding what kind of future we have and what kind of weapons we have, and do we want computers that take these decisions. I'm not talking about whether they should assist with taking these decisions, but whether they should take the final decisions, I think is so important. Africa has a central role to play in this debate on how we should go forward with the technology, in particular this technology that can take decisions concerning the supreme value of the right of human life. Thank you.